Welcome back, everybody, to the Marketing Rules podcast. And today I'm joined by Emma from Radical Recruit. Emma, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast. I think we've been trying to get you on for probably something like 6 months, but sometimes you've had to cancel, sometimes I've had to cancel, but finally we're here, face to face, sitting down and recording. For everybody listening today, Emma, it would be great if you can tell them a little bit about kind of Radical Recruit, because one of the reasons why I wanted you on, because you're a little bit different to everybody else who's kind of working out there. The way your business is set up, the way it works, kind of who you work with is really quite unique, and that's what kind of I think our audience are going to find fascinating. So yes, if you could just kind of tell us a little bit about Radical Recruit.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having me. I think probably the delay in recording this was mostly my fault. I appreciate your patience. Okay, so to set the scene, I have worked in the human services sector for like 15 years. And throughout my tenure in the charity sector, I was responsible for managing a whole load of return to work, ready for work, jobs brokerage type services for what I call the underdogs of society. And in retrospect, I now know that those were watered down, really crappy versions of what people who experience disadvantage actually need in order to get ready for and enter the labour market, as well as progress in their chosen careers. Before I founded Radical, I worked for a grassroots organisation who supported women and women coming from the criminal justice system, as well as women who had been in the care system to get jobs, reintegrate back into the community, re-establish themselves in the roles that they had before prison, and in theory, not reoffend. And throughout my 2 years in that role, I became acutely aware of sort of the failings of the third sector in providing those types of support. And I believed that I could do it better. So Radical was born in 2019, October. Ironically, only a couple of months before the pandemic completely halted most recruitment. And at that stage, I didn't really know a great deal about recruitment. I didn't really have a lot of sort of business savvy or acumen, but I knew that in order to do this work better, we needed to operate like a commercial recruitment consultancy does normally. And I guess that was sort of the model that shaped Radical in the beginning. So I sort of set out to work with three constituencies: ex-offenders, care leavers, and homeless folk, because they tend to be the same people at different points in their life journey. And what I really wanted to do was sort of agitate that cycle. Then the pandemic sort of happened, and those who were closest to the breadline and not represented in the labour market were adversely and disproportionately impacted by the plague. Brexit happened, and there were all of these amazing opportunities owing to the fact that, employers couldn't find talent, skilled or just labour generally. And, of course, George Floyd's murder and the world's sort of racial equity awakening, which caused them to think about diversity more seriously, and turn their sort of diversity rhetoric into meaningful action. And often that was through recruiting people who were marginalised because of their difference, if you like. So being the typical founder, love shiny new things, really enjoy the opportunity to try, fail, iterate, try again, sort of grabbed onto lots of different opportunities, and broadened our reach to anyone with a protected characteristic under the law. And I use that term really loosely in the context of getting into the labour market, because most people don't enjoy the protections they need. And also those with sort of really adverse, usually adverse life experiences which make it really tricky to get into the labour market in the first place, or sort of return after a period of absence. So I'm talking about, ex-offenders, care leavers, people who have survived domestic violence and abuse, modern day slaves, really anyone who has a barrier to work. So 3 years on, We have made over 520 places. I'm not sure what the count is this week. And we've worked with some of really amazing brands like Warner Media and Sage and these WPP, as well as sort of small and medium enterprise, and placed radicals from lots of different backgrounds into all sorts of jobs. Everything from sort of marketing managers to accountants to civil enforcement officers. You name it, we've probably done it. As well as the recruitment piece, we've also done a whole load of learning over the last 3 years and come to the realization that there's loads of people who are what we call radical, who will allow us to take them on a journey from A to B, A being possibly not sure what they're wanting to do for a career, or not sure what they're good at, or how their sort of skills transfer from life to work, to B, which is sort of radical ready and, in a position where they can navigate through a competitive recruitment process. So that's not so much of, I think probably the hardest part of the work we do is actually with employers to get them to the point where they're attracting, engaging with, recruiting, onboarding, and supporting radical people to flourish. So around the recruitment piece, we've developed a really holistic, if you like, commercial offering to get our clients radical ready. And that might be through supporting with, infrastructure like policy and process. It could be helping them to position their brand as a sort of diversity employer of choice. It could be helping them to shift their cultural dial and get buy-in from those who are actually doing the recruiting. It could be helping them to sort of reimagine their assessment or interview tools so that, they're assessing people fairly. All sorts of things, really, to ensure that when we put a radical into an organisation, they will succeed, I guess.
Yeah. So to find your kind of radicals, as you find it in the first place, are you doing a lot of kind of outreach in prisons and in kind of how do you kind of go out? Because that for me feels like the kind of difficult bit to kind of get the, in the traditional sense, the candidates to know who you are, to know that a business like yours exists to help people in those situations.
Yeah, sure. So we do lots of sort of engagement activities on behalf of our clients. We have a database of radicals that have gone through our employability program and are endorsed for recruitment. So we have that database like any other recruiter would.
Yeah.
Where we can't fill a vacancy through that database, we will design a marketing campaign that talks to and really engages with the communities that the client wants to connect with but aren't finding through their traditional search methods. We also have a amazing network of what we call inclusion partners. So they're organisations who deliver different types of services to radical people. So, for example, housing, or it might be, employability provision. It could be drug and alcohol counselling, all sorts of things. And what we do is we take our clients' vacancies to our inclusion partners and ask them to market to the radical people that they're supporting. We have we've got 800 job centres on our sort of network. We've got probation services, prisons, CRCs. We have churches, places where radical people congregate. We have connections into those communities. And really what we do is we use our brand, which is trusted amongst radical people, to endorse the clients that we're working with, so that radical people feel like if they do apply, their application will be taken seriously and that they will be participating in a really fair and equitable process to ensure that they sort of have the same opportunities to win the job on merit.
Yeah, given the respect that they're due, I guess, right? That's what kind of that they might have kind of missed out on through other means. And then from the flip side, from the client side, the clients that are using you, being cynical, are they doing it because they are now the discussion around equity and diversity is something that they are trying to kind of participate in truly, and do want to find some great candidates and great radicals who can work with them that they just might not be able to kind of have any interaction with previously? Or is there a kind of a mixture of, well, they've kind of feel that they should be doing this for kind of CSR reasons and things like that? Well, I know that's kind of, so you might have both. I mean, but you kind of, maybe you choose who you want to work with. How does that kind of process work?
Yeah, really good question. Sorry, I'm not sure whether you can hear that background noise. There's a helicopter flying over. No? Okay, cool.
Right.
So we work with any organisation who wants to turn their diversity, CSR, ESG commitment into meaningful action by recruiting radical people. In order to work with us, all of our clients are sort of vetted quite thoroughly to ensure that the motivation is pure and they are willing to do the work that would enable them to attract, engage with, recruit, retain radical talent. Often clients come to us wanting a Band-Aid solution, and 3 years on, we're in a position to walk away from that sort of business. Most clients, I think, come with sort of really genuine, authentic commitments, but perhaps don't understand and fully empathise with the challenges radical people face when it comes to entering the labour market. So to give you a really obvious example, 1 in 7 people are neurodivergent in the UK community. And in order to sort of attract neurodivergent people and ensure a process from application, interview, onboarding is accessible, a huge amount of work needs to be done to really understand what the barriers are for this group of people. So it could be that, someone is dyslexic, for example, and actually your usual advertising copy, your marketing copy, your recruitment copy isn't accessible because it's on your website, it's written in black font on a white background, and there's no accessibility plugin. There's loads of word pollution on the page. So in order for a dyslexic person to read that job ad and then hit the apply button and complete the potentially inaccessible application form, that's a real barrier. So without doing the work to understand exactly what the challenges are, employers are really, these people are self-selecting out of the process because it's just not accessible.
Yeah.
So we do a lot of work to look at, end-to-end processes through really specific lenses, disability being a really, frequent one. There's loads and loads of sort of untapped pools of talent that organisations are just not thinking about. You've got 11 million people with a conviction, but so many organisations have that box that says, do you have a conviction? And so someone with a conviction, having been discarded on the talent scrap heap over and over and over again, is going to read that and be like, I'm not going to tick that box because I know I'm not going to get a chance to apply. I won't bother. So we look at these processes through all of these different lenses and help our clients to really reimagine how they would usually talk to these pools of talent, attract them, get them to apply for the job and interview them.
So kind of part of your kind of business and role now is that education and consultancy piece for your clients?
It's the biggest part of what we do, honestly, and the hardest part, because, there's a piece around sort of shifting attitudes and challenging popular perceptions of radical people. Largely speaking, our people are viewed through a lens of mistrust. They're assumed to not have the skills or the motivation required to apply for a job and sustain employment. And for decades, often centuries, depending on how old the company is, they've not been considered viable candidates. So that's like a really big piece. There's a piece around sort of de-biasing processes and making processes and tools really accessible. There's a bit around sort of helping organisations to understand their risk appetite You know, there's a whole load of misplaced fear around litigation and various other things when it comes to hiring people with disabilities and especially people with convictions. And then that piece around, okay, if you hire someone who's radical, what support do they need that might be different to your sort of bog standard average mainstream candidate? So thinking about sort of their longer term requirements. So we support post-placement as well.
And with regards to the kind of clients, are they receptive, you know, or is there pushback? Or I mean, I know you said you kind of self-select some of these kind of businesses now, but you know, it's interesting to kind of, you know, the kind of people that you're kind of dealing with. You know, is it mainly the recruiters, the talent acquisition in house? Is it who are those kinds of people that you're kind of now having these kind of discussions within these businesses?
Yeah, I mean, it's I'm not really sure I've got the answer to that question. I think it's mostly sort of at HRD level in-house.
I suppose I'm trying to see where it's kind of driven from within these businesses. That's the kind of question, really. You know, I mean, if it's something that you know, for the people in the audience listening, you know, the in-house recruiters and things like that, is that driven by them? Should it be driven by them? Is it driven kind of high above? You know, where in organisations? Because you said you've worked for some really big organisations, and it would be kind of, it's just interesting to know, you know, where the drivers are for this that bring you in. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's different for every client, if I'm honest. I would say for our sort of bigger corporate clients, mostly it's sort of HR teams who are coming to us. But we can knock on the CSR and diversity door as well, or the ESG door. I think in order for the work that we do, in order for us to really add value, people from all parts of the business need to be involved. And I think what happens is, you know, boards set diversity targets, and then that responsibility is delegated to HR or diversity, whoever the diversity lead is, and perhaps they're not, you know, appropriately resourced or qualified to actually do the work, or perhaps there's no budget to bring in sort of consultants like us to help do the work. They haven't thought about sort of the long-term requirements around, you know, capacity building, the people who would be doing the hiring. It might be that they haven't actually considered their policy position on sort of X, Y, and Z that would impact their ability to work with us. So, you know, executive sponsorship and accountability is really important. I'm not convinced that most of our clients have that. And that's a conversation we often end up having with our clients. They know what they want to do. They don't appreciate often the work that's involved and the cost associated with that work, and the fact that it takes time. You know, it's I mean, it's very cliche me saying this, but it's a journey. You know, you can't achieve diversity without having, you know, equity of opportunity. And, you know, when you're bringing diverse people in to retain those people, you must create places of work where they feel like they belong and they're included. So the recruitment piece is a tiny piece of work, and there's much bigger sort of structural issues that often we need to tackle with our clients as well. The problem is we work with, you know, teeny tiny startups all the way to big matrix organizations. So back to your question, I'm not entirely sure that, you know, any one type of, you know, person within an organization is coming to us saying, can you help? It really depends on the business.
Yeah. And from some of the kind of previous conversations we had, there's some kind of some interesting updates at Radical kind of coming in the future. I understand there's kind of different, you know, you're kind of expanding slightly. So why don't you kind of take us through what the kind of future holds?
Yeah, I'm really excited actually, because I mean, I've known I'd needed to do this for about 2 years, but typical founder, you're kind of like juggling millions of balls and trying to, you know, keep the doors open throughout arguably the most challenging sort of economic and political environment, certainly in my lifetime. But I've managed to convince my two right-hand humans, Kirsty and Holly, to co-found a second Radical brand. And we will divide the existing entity into two and relaunch Radical Recruit as a charity. that will support businesses to pipeline for early careers and those entry-level sort of roles in a number of different sectors, from retail to construction to catering. And those sort of opportunities are really great for radicals who are furthest from the labour market, who will go through a really intensive program of support to get them to the point where we feel and they feel that they have the tools and the confidence to navigate through a competitive recruitment process and get their first job potentially, or a job that would enable them to sort of return back into the labour market after a period of absence. Be Radical, the second brand, will be is a unapologetically commercial entity, and it will hopefully make loads of money so that we can fund the charity, the work of the charity. Because one thing that I don't want to continue doing is rely on grants and government funding to do this really important work with super radicals. So that entity will offer all of our training, all of our consultancy, things like team away days and learning events, and also recruitment services for professional people-centric disciplines. Mostly, I say that, we've placed loads of accountants as well. Not sure you call them people-centric disciplines, but yeah, roles within professional services, mostly in the corporate world.
Okay. I mean, that sounds amazing, right? It sounds like there's a lot kind of happening over kind of the rest of this year. Emma, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. I hope everyone has kind of has enjoyed it as much as I've listening to kind of what you guys are doing over there. We will obviously include all of your details in the show notes. So if anybody wants to know more, they can kind of reach out and contact you directly. I'm sure once kind of in a few years' time, when things have even got even bigger and it's even slightly, it's this kind of huge corporate entity with all kinds of charities and things, we'll have you back on to kind of discuss that. But Emma, for now, thank you very much.
I would welcome that, and thank you very much for having me, mate.